As a compulsive gambler, gambling addiction caused me to do some of the most ludicrous, and when I think about it, totally embarrassing things. I'll explain them in this video. My name's Matt, I'm a compulsive gambler in recovery, and I like to think of myself as your mind and movement mentor here to help you. So this video is probably going to be quite relatable to a compulsive gambler and probably strange and surreal, but hopefully slightly thought-provoking and insightful to maybe a non-gambler or someone interested in the topic. So, yeah, I mean, there's that psychological phenomenon, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where as humans, we have the tendency to think that we are more intelligent than we actually are. We don't know what we don't know our blind spots, and we overestimate our own intelligence. And I get that, but I'm 40 years old, been on the planet for a while, and I like to think of myself as not stupid. Like I can apply common sense when I need to. You know, I'm not an idiot. But when I think back to what I've done as a gambler, it is very, very hard to argue the case that I'm not. You know, gambling for me started when I was teens, mid-teens, fruit machines. I was 6'3" from about age 16, 17, so I could always maybe pass for slightly older than I was. And the first bit of lunacy that I can recall is I used to play fruit machines, and I got sold from some dodgy bloke down the pub one of those keys that you could put in the machine and it would tell you what the last payout was, and something else, I can't quite remember what, but it was something that was supposed to potentially give you an edge on whether or not the machine was worth playing. And then I remember there's rumours circulated that when you put the coin in, if you listen closely, if it went down and made like a tss, as in it hit like a bed of coins, there was a lot of money in the machine, and therefore it was ready to pay out. And my fruit machine record was terrible. I would often win a jackpot and then just keep playing, because it was only ever about just playing to play, as opposed to actually kind of, every now and again I might walk away. If I put a couple of quid in and turned it into 30 or something like that, I would be like, okay, that's great, that's enough for now, or I just end up going down the road and playing another one. And then when I got onto sports betting, I was terrible for what I now know as known as the gambler's fallacy, which is where the idea of something has happened for a consecutive number of times, which means the next outcome is likely to be different to that. And so essentially a classic example for this, I think the term got coined from the Monte Carlo casino, like back in the 20s or something like that, where there was like 18 reds in a row. And by about the 11th, 12th one, people were just putting the most obnoxious sums on black to come in, thinking like, oh, this is it, we're going to get rich. And, you know, loads of people ended up bankrupt, losing their houses, because it just went on longer than you would have thought it to. Bearing in mind, there's obviously almost a 50-50 probability of it being one way or the other. So in theory, if there's been 15 reds in a row, then it's so much more likely to be a black, even though it's actually not, because every time the ball's spun, it's just under 50%. The chances don't change, but you think they do based on the previous actions before you lay the bet. And I used to be terrible for football with corners, football with number of goals. I referenced this in a previous video, and someone commented, asked me to tell more about it. And it would just be simply like, if Manchester City or one of the relatively high-scoring Premiership teams, Arsenal, Chelsea, had been in a number of low-scoring games, I would think, okay, well, there's going to be more than one goal in the first half, and there's going to be more than 3 goals overall. There just has to be. And, you know, sometimes it would be successful. I'll be honest, I didn't lose money every single week. I think, you know, gambling kept me interested for the long term, albeit it was terribly destructive in the medium to long term. I won't pretend there wasn't flurries of wins and winning streaks that I could go on. And it was almost like that was just enough to play into the narrative of actually my system would work, my system that was bulletproof and going to pay dividends over time, and my get rich quick scheme that with my own, wonderful intellect that no one else was privy to. And, thinking back now, it was just, I was chasing the buzz of gambling. I know that. And that gambler's fallacy one is still quite tricky, because common sense tells you that an alternative outcome will happen at some point. You can tell yourself it's a 49% chance it's going to be red every time the ball's spun or whatever. But if you watch enough blacks, or if you watch enough non-reds, there's going to be one at some point. And it's almost kind of like the hope that kills you. I used to play the roulette machines in the bookmakers. I spoke about this in another one of the videos, but I remember one time I put £90 in, played it all the way up to 2,300 and something, and then just never cashed out, went all the way back down and ended up losing my 90 quid. One time I remember putting £1 in one of them and playing, I think I got up to about £146. So, it's not mega money, but, as 140x your stake, if that's still not satisfying, what are you doing? And I really wasn't sure if I was going to admit this one, but I will. Often when I ran out of money, I would just watch other people play the fixed odds betting terminals, just kind of vicariously to live the idea of either trying to call the number in ahead of time, or just being in that fog and in that mode. It did matter that it wasn't my money, because I was frustrated that I had no more capital to deploy. But it was just kind of like it's time that I'll never get back, watching over someone's shoulder, just pretending to be invested. And I remember the old Ladbrokes machines. Each number would be a kind of like a pattern of what would happen. So it was like a 10-second video of that number. So it would be, if it was going to be number 24, the number 24 video would play out for 10 seconds. And by the end of it, I could almost call what number it was going to be after about 1.5, 2 seconds of it starting, which was quite depressing if it wasn't my number. But that's how much I'd kind of, I suppose in some ways that was done by design, because that kind of, I don't know, it drew out the endorphins, the excitement for longer. Not only was it that you knew it was your number, it was then you got to kind of watch it come to fruition. And things like this just absolutely tied my brain in knots. I would look at previous statistics from football and think, okay, I'd go down the leagues. So Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany haven't been in a game with over 10 corners in their last 6. So I don't know who they're playing. I couldn't name you one player, but I'm going to bet that there's over 10 or 11 or more corners in their game. I won't be watching it. I don't have access to any kind of German television to watch it. And I'll just hit refresh constantly on my phone to see if it's flashed up. If there been one, I might go into some of the other apps to double verify, looking at the statistics on like Bet365 or something like that. And yeah, key time on planet Earth that I will never get back, of thinking that I had a system. And yeah, some embarrassing tales, a whole lot of naivety, a lot of cognitive biases at play, I suppose, to my detriment. But here we are, 7 months and 9 days without any kind of gambling activity, which I'm tremendously proud of. Certainly don't wish I was back in that mode, but I know that a certain chain of events and relapse would take me back there pretty quickly. And as ridiculous as those things sound now, driving to other towns 30, 40 minutes away because I was self-excluded from bookmakers in my local area, one side of me thinks I could never be that stupid ever again. The other part of me, which is no doubt the truthful part and the part that I should stay totally vigilant of, knows that like that I could go back into that ridiculous headspace. And I could rationalise at the time why it wasn't ridiculous, because I'd be fully trenched in addiction. So my name is Matt, as I say, compulsive gambler. I make these videos for a younger version of myself. Would he have listened? I don't know. But I like this idea of raising awareness about gambling addiction that I'm incredibly passionate about, and giving kind of the abstract content, slightly left field thinking about addiction that I would have been definitely found beneficial in my younger years. So if you know anyone that is struggling with compulsive gambling, please feel free to share this video with them. If you can relate to these experiences, please support the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing. I respond to all of the comments, and it helps me reach more people, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in the next video very soon.